Hey guys, Travis Gillespie here, and we're going to be dealing with real numbers, the real numbers. And before we even get started, let's take a look at where our number system comes from. And as a kid, when you're young, you learn to count through probably watching TV or hearing a mom's voice. But let's say, most of the time we probably grew up watching Sesame Street or some other TV show where you learn to count the basics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And these are called our natural numbers or counting numbers. Change colors real quick. So our natural or counting numbers. And simply because, you're learning to count. But as you get a little bit older, you start to realize, hey, that's not the complete truth. It's not the whole set. There's something else. And you grow and you actually probably even develop more sophisticated TV shows such as Barney or another show again. And you learn, hey, it's not the whole truth. There's something missing or a few things missing. But the big one is 0. You say, wait, there's this number 0. And I'm going to start counting starting with 0. And I'll move on to 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on again. And 0, since it's our starting set, and you use it, we call these our actual whole numbers. So whole numbers are actually, I wrote it in a different color. Maybe I can highlight it in red at least. Whole numbers are our non-negative numbers. Again, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And then you still get a little bit more sophisticated and older, and you say, we need a way to describe things such as temperature and values of money. You go up to the north, maybe you grow up in Texas, the heat, but you move up to the north where it drops below 0, the temperature, and during the wintertime, and then you say, I need to go buy a jacket or something. Or maybe financially you don't have enough money to buy a jacket. You have to borrow money from somebody. So you have to borrow money, and then you start to realize that, hey, there's these things called negative numbers. I'm talking about borrowing money because if you borrow enough money, you'll end up with $0. And if you end up with $0 and borrow money on it, you're probably taking out a loan or borrowing. We're working about temperatures. So when we're dealing with numbers that can drop below 0, when you borrow money, if you borrow $5, you don't have $5, you have negative $5. So if you borrow $1 from somebody, you have negative $1. And so we have these things called negative numbers. And again, we have our real numbers, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then our whole numbers, which include 0. And now we've moved on to a set of numbers which include negative numbers. Negative numbers, all they really do is mirror our positive number system, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, but they go in the opposite direction, or they are on the opposite side of 0. So now you have negative 1, you have negative 2, and so forth. And what you end up calling these numbers they are our fancy integers. Let's put integers here. Another way to look at this, when you actually put the two systems together, integers are our whole numbers. Those are the positive numbers and numbers that include 0. And you add with it the negative numbers. you end up with something called integers. It's a set called integers. Let's look a little bit further at some other scenarios. Because it's not all the truth, or it's not fully complete yet. You say, hey, we still don't have a way to describe parts of things. And a real common one that we use a lot is our pizza. And hey, everybody's going to get a slice. Everybody deserves a part. Everybody deserves a piece of pizza. So what we do here is say we need a way to describe parts of things. I'm not going to eat one pizza. I'm going to eat just a piece or a part of it. And what we end up here with, if that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slices, you realize is you only ate 1 out of 6 pieces, or 1/6 of the pizza. And what we end up here are things called fractions. And fractions are numbers where there is a number in the numerator, which is the top value, and a number in the denominator, which is the bottom value. So now we're dealing with fractions, and when we take our fraction set, so taking our fraction set, we say, hey, there's an integer on the top in the numerator, there's an integer on the bottom, and that's a non-zero integer. You can't have 0 in place of the bottom denominator value. But when you do have these integers in place and they are set up as a ratio, one number over the next, then you have fractions, and these are called our rational numbers. Fractions are rational numbers. And again, I forgot to change and back and forth in our blue. So this should all be written in blue, and these are our examples of rational numbers. So let's review for a second. I'm going to change pen colors again. And when we deal with our first set were the natural numbers, or the counting numbers. And then we moved on to whole numbers. And our whole numbers, well, our natural numbers were 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we added a 0, and we created our whole numbers. Change pen colors again here. These are our whole numbers. We said, hey, well, wait a second. We want to include negative numbers. So what we're going to do here, so let's take a look at this again. The thing that we're seeing is, I'm just moving the screen over some, but the first thing we said were, hey, we got these things called natural numbers. Those are 1, 2, 3, and so forth. These are our natural numbers. And then someone came along and said, but wait a second, we've got to add a 0 to this. So that person said, well, we're going to call 0, 1, 2. We'll start with 0 and then have 1, 2, 3, 4. These are our whole numbers. And then someone else came along and said, hey, but we've also got these negative numbers. So we're going to add those to our whole numbers. And we're going to have -2, -3, -1, 0, 1, 2, and so forth down this way and this way. So yes, now you have your set of integers. So let's take a look at all of this now. We have our natural numbers. What ended up happening, I'm going to change colors here. But what ended up happening is we said, look, we've got these natural counting numbers. Those are our 1, 2, 3, 4. These are all natural. They are counting numbers because you learn to count them. And then, second, somebody came along. As you got a little bit older, you realized, let me box this up real quick first. When you got older, you realized, hey, that's not the whole truth. There's something more here. So what ended up happening as you got older, you really realized, you said, hey, wait a second. There are these things called natural counting numbers. When you were first introduced to numbers, you were introduced to counting or natural numbers. You say, hey, 1, I can count from 1 to 10. Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. And then these were, again, called our natural or counting numbers. As you got older, you said, wait a second, there are these things called integers. And what integers do is, well, and then somebody said, well, wait a second, we gotta have a 0 in there. So you have 0, 1, 2, and you start with 0, and then you go on to so on. And you could probably still count to 10, maybe even 20. So this created your whole number system. These were whole numbers. Somebody else came along. That person said, well, wait a second. That's not the whole truth still. There's still more to the puzzle. So your natural numbers, so your whole numbers included natural numbers. So your whole numbers included natural numbers. And then somebody else came along and said, well, wait a second. That might not be all the case. I was at $0. I had $0 in my bank. I had to go borrow some money. And I found out that, hey, I don't have any money. And you know what? I even have less than not having money because I owe somebody money. And in those cases, well, you end up with negative values. And negative values just mirror positive values, but they're on the opposite side of 0. And then somebody else came along. And when you add whole numbers and negative numbers, when you add the whole numbers with the negative number, when you add the whole numbers, 1, 2, 3,